The blunt nose that made it look like a bulldog was never meant to look like anything. That face is just where the radiator ended up. Nobody in Pennsylvania designed it. Men dying in a war gave it the name. Before there was a Bulldog, there was a company that wouldn't put its own name on anything it sold. The Mack brothers came out of the wagon trade, horse-drawn wagons, the exact thing their trucks would one day bury. There was already bad blood in those years between the men who ran horses for a living and the noisy motor trucks starting to crowd them off the streets. So when the Macks built their first motor vehicle, a heavy sightseeing bus, they kept the family name off it completely. Their early machines went out under a different badge, Manhattan, deliberately held apart from the wagon business that still paid the bills. That first bus, the one they later called Old Number 1, went into service carrying sightseers and just kept running, year after year, until they finally pulled it off the road more than 2 decades later. The name Mack, the word that would end up meaning truck in plain American speech, didn't take over the nose of the trucks until around 1910. A wagon family had just built the machine that would put wagons out of business, and it took them the better part of a decade to admit whose name belonged on it. The machine that made them was the model they called the AC. And almost everything strange about it came from one decision: build it tough instead of pretty. They put the radiator behind the engine, back against the firewall, tucked under a squared-off hood with just a small round opening up front. The logic was simple. A radiator hung out front was the first thing to get crushed in a wreck or a hard day's work. Set back against the firewall, it was protected, and the driver could finally see the road over that stubby hood. That chopped-off snout, the whole reason the thing looked like a dog, was a protection decision and a visibility decision. Nothing more than that. The rest of the AC ran on the same thinking. It used chain drive, and people who don't know better call that primitive. It wasn't. Under solid rubber tires and heavy loads, the shaft-driven axles of the day couldn't take the pounding, and chains could. They were tougher, easier to fix out on the road, and better suited to the abuse. Chain drive was the reliable choice, not the cheap one. Running one meant living with those chains. They wanted oil, they wanted adjustment. They threw grease on your boots, and between the chains and the solid tires with no air in them, a loaded Bulldog was something you heard grinding up a grade before you ever saw it. But it kept moving when a lighter rig would have quit, and for the men hauling with it, that trade was worth every dirty hour. Even the steering wheel came canted out of the firewall at about 45 degrees, laid back toward the driver, back when the competition was still bolting the wheel straight up like a riverboat. Every odd thing about that truck was an answer to a real problem, and it earned its keep at real work. These were the machines that hauled the coal, the brick, the steel, and the fill that put the cities up in the 1920s. Dump bodies, delivery beds, tank wagons, whatever a growing country needed moved. A man who worked construction or ran a city road in those years didn't admire the Bulldog from across the street. He sat behind that laid-back wheel and felt every cobblestone come straight up through the frame. Then the war came, and the war is where the face got its name. The Army needed trucks that could drag artillery and haul supplies through mud that swallowed lighter machines whole. The AC did it. It pulled, it hauled, it kept crawling forward where the pretty trucks sank and stayed sunk. That heavy, low-geared chain drive that looked so old-fashioned back home turned out to be exactly what a truck needed to claw itself through a torn-up battlefield with a full load behind it. British soldiers, watching this stubborn, blunt-faced American machine refuse to quit, started calling it the Bulldog. The name nobody had planned, for the face nobody had drawn, came from men in the trenches who just needed something that worked. The Bulldog's real fingerprints, though, don't show up on a battlefield. They show up on the road you probably drove to work. In 1919, once the shooting stopped, The Army's Motor Transport Corps sent a convoy of vehicles clear across the United States to find out what those roads were really worth. The answer, mostly, was nothing. The roads barely existed. Bridges gave out under the weight. Trucks bogged down to the axles in dirt that turned to soup in the rain, and the whole column crawled west at the speed of a man walking. The heavy Mack ACs were among the machines doing the ugly work, shoring up weak bridges so the column could cross, dragging bogged trucks out of the mire mile after mile after mile. Riding along as an observer was a young officer named Dwight Eisenhower. He never forgot how bad it was. Decades later, sitting in the White House, he threw his weight behind the law that built the interstate highway system. That convoy rolled on a lot of different trucks, and those highways had a lot of fathers, but the Bulldog was right there in the mud at the very start of it. While the truck was turning into a legend, the men whose name it wore were losing their grip on it. Wall Street had gotten its hands on the company. Financiers folded Mack into a holding company around 1911, the way financiers do, and the family that built the place started heading for the door. Within a couple of years, most of the brothers were gone, and only one of them was left inside. Jack Mack, the founder, the man who started the whole thing, went out and built a competitor. There was just one problem. The name Mack didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to the investors. So the man actually named Mack had to sell his new trucks under a mangled version of his own name, McCarr. Mack and Carr, his partner Roland Carr's name, welded onto what was left of his own. He founded it, though he didn't run it long, and the company limped along until the Depression finally finished it off in 1935. For the dozen years he had left, he got to watch his own surname harden into a household word on the sides of trucks he no longer had any say over. Jack didn't live to see even that. On the 14th of March, 1924, he was doing what he always did, running late to a meeting, pushing hard. Near a small Pennsylvania town called Neffs, on his way up to Weatherly, a trolley came through a crossing and broadsided his coupe. Passing drivers and the trolley crew laid his broken body on a pile of coats by the side of the road. A nurse who happened to be passing pronounced him dead before help ever arrived. The man who did as much as anyone alive to push this country off the horse and off the rails was killed at a crossing by a streetcar. There's one more Mack man who built something that outlived him and never got to watch it ride. The Bulldog everybody pictures on the hood, the little metal one, the ornament, came from the company's chief engineer, Alfred Massery. He carved the first one by hand out of a bar of soap, lying in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. He filed the patent in 1932. It was a small thing, a chrome dog on the nose of a truck, but it turned into the one piece of the machine every driver knew by heart, the face a man caught in his mirror and pointed out to his kids. The next year, 1933, that ornament rode on the nose of a Mack truck for the first time, and that same year, Massery boarded the Navy airship Akron and died when it went down in a storm off the coast, in one of the worst air disasters this country had ever seen. He shaped the face the whole world still knows Mack by, and he was gone the season it finally went to work. The trucks kept running without any of them. 40,299 ACs rolled off the line over 22 years of production, and the solid tire ones were still a common sight grinding through American cities well into the 1950s, and not unheard of even into the 1960s. Blunt-faced, chain-driven, the radiator still hiding behind the engine. Still working the streets 40 years on, long after the men who gave them that face had all gone quiet.